Hey everyone, welcome back to the Get More Ministries YouTube channel. My name is Daryl, and this is another video in our Get More 24 series, which is a Bible reading plan from January through the end of December for the year 2024, where we're reading the entire Bible cover to cover. We love reading the Bible kind of in bigger chunks here at Get More Ministries because it does a few things for us. First of all, we kind of think of reading the Bible, studying the Bible, and meditating in the Bible as all different things that kind of produce different results. And so reading is what we call the constant absorption of the text. And the purpose of it is to build our familiarity with the text and the overarching narrative that runs from Genesis to Revelation. So reading through the Bible in 1 year really helps you get a feel for that narrative because you're reading in 3 and 4 chapter chunks each day. And that kind of helps you. It's enough of the text to kind of get into a rhythm and a flow. It's not too much to where you can't do it every day, and you're also going to be able to just kind of pick up where you left off and be like, oh right, this is what's going on. So we really love reading, and that's kind of our goal in reading. So this video is going to cover the book of Leviticus. I had originally wanted to do a video every week throughout the year, and just my work schedule plus seminary plus home life, everything, like, nope, can't do it. So I'm now kind of structuring this video series, and it's going to be more book by book. So I did one on Exodus, now we're doing Leviticus. And what I want to focus on for Leviticus is how this book ties in with the overarching narrative that we've been experiencing from Genesis 1 all the way through Exodus 40, and now we pick up in Leviticus 1. We're kind of like, what's going on? It's very easy to feel lost and disconnected in Leviticus, but I actually really love this book. I think it's very cool. I think it's very interesting, and I think it reveals quite a bit about who God is and who humanity is and how that relationship between God and his people is supposed to work. So what I want to do is focus on how does this book tie into the narrative, both with what we just finished reading and where we're going next. So let's start there. I am going to share my screen so we can have the text up, and then I've got some notes that I'll be looking at as well. So first and foremost, point number 1, and this is kind of where we're going to stay all day, Leviticus is part of the narrative. It's not a separate standalone book that was then just placed between Exodus and Numbers. It actually fits between Exodus and Numbers in the sequential flow of the timeline. So it very much is part of the narrative. And we can see that here in Leviticus 1:1, which reads, "Then the Lord summoned Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting." And then in verse 2, you start seeing the dialogue here. There we go. So then verse 2 starts the dialogue. So Leviticus, while it is the genre of law, where we're receiving the law, God is actually telling Moses the law. We have characters. It's a narrative. You have God. You have Moses. It's not so much a dialogue per se as more of mostly God talking, but it is narrative. It's not just a bulleted list or anything like that. So that's the first thing that really helps us kind of start getting our mind around this book. It's part of the narrative. But now we want to figure out, okay, well, how does it really tie into what we've read previously? How does it tie into Exodus? And so really what we're looking at here is Exodus chapters 19 through 40. That's really where Leviticus picks up. So the first 18 chapters of Exodus, you have the story of Moses, and he flees into the wilderness after, rising up and killing the Egyptian. Then he flees into the wilderness. God meets him. He leads the people out of Egypt. They get to the base of Mount Sinai, and that's where we pick up in chapter 19. And then chapters 19 through 40 is really God preparing to meet his people, meeting them, and then beginning to deliver the law. So that's kind of what I want to touch on. We're actually going to spend quite a bit of time in Exodus 19 because it prepares us for understanding where we are in this narrative in Leviticus 1. So in Exodus 19, 3 through 6, let me get there. There we go. Exodus 19, 3 through 6. Moses goes up Mount Sinai to hear from God, and God tells Moses the result of Israel's covenant faithfulness. So God presents this covenant to Moses, and it's for the entire nation of Israel. And he says, this is what's going to happen if you guys are faithful. So let's read 3 through 6 here really quick in Exodus 19. Moses went up the mountain to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain. This is what you must say to the house of Jacob and explain to the Israelites. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you will carefully listen to me and keep my covenant, you will be my own possession out of all the peoples, although the whole earth is mine. And you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These are the words that you are to say to the Israelites. So God explains to Moses what the result will be if they are faithful to his covenant. He's chosen them out of all the world, even though the whole earth is his. He's chosen the sons of Jacob, and he tells them, you will be my kingdom of priests, my holy nation. I don't know why that popped. There we go. You will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. So that's the result that we're going for. Then Moses relays that message to the elders of Israel in verses 19, there we go. In Exodus 19, 7 through 8. So after Moses came back, he summoned the elders of the people and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. Then all the people responded together, we will do all that the Lord has spoken. So Moses brought the people's words back to the Lord. So the Lord meets Moses on Mount Sinai, says, hey, this is what we're going for. I'm going to make a covenant with you guys. This is what will happen should you be faithful to the covenant. Moses relays that message to Israel's elders, and everyone agrees, yeah, we will be faithful to the covenant. And then Moses brings the people's response back to God. Then God has Moses prepare the people to meet him, God, meaning God. So then verses 9 through 17 in Exodus chapter 19 is God explaining to Moses all the preparations that the nation of Israel has to go through in order to meet God, because he's actually going to come down and bring his presence among them, and they are going to meet. The God of Israel's fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is going to meet the descendants of those three patriarchs at Mount Sinai. So we have all these instructions in Exodus 19, 9 through 17. And then God meets the people and speaks to them, and at Mount Sinai, starting in Exodus 19, verse 18, and he speaks to them, and this is actually where he gives them the 10 Commandments. So that section runs through Exodus 20:17. So Exodus 19:18 through 20:17 is God actually coming down and meeting the people and giving the 10 Commandments to them. So I'm going to read just a little bit of that. We're not going to read the whole thing. But starting in verse 16, on the third day, when morning came, there was thunder and lightning, a thick cloud on the mountain, and a very loud blast from a ram's horn, so that all the people in the camp shuddered. Then Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mount Sinai was completely enveloped in smoke because the Lord came down on it in fire. Its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain shook violently. As the sound of the ram's horn grew louder and louder, Moses spoke to God and answered him in the thunder. So God came down on Mount Sinai, brought his presence down on the mountain, and the mountain is clearly affected, and the people are witnessing this, and it's like, whoa, like we've never seen anything like this before. So to sum up where we've come so far, because it's Exodus 19 has a lot of sequential flow. God brings his people out of Egypt, prepares to make a covenant with them. They agree to keep the covenant, and then he prepares to meet them. They make those preparations. He meets them. And then he gives the first few set of laws. Part of that is the 10 Commandments. So we see the end of 19 flows right into chapter 20, and that is the Ten Commandments. So when we get to the end of this first section of the law, actually in Exodus 20:18, so here we finished the Ten Commandments, we see the people's reaction. The people are terrified, and they actually request that God does not speak to all of them, but speaks instead to Moses, and then Moses comes and relays it back to them. So let me read Exodus 20:18 through 19. All the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the sound of the ram's horn, and the mountains surrounded by smoke. When the people saw it, they trembled and stood at a distance. "You speak to us, and we will listen," they said to Moses. "But don't let God speak to us, or we will die." So they see God's presence come down on the mountain. They hear his voice. They hear the first few commands, including the Ten Commandments, and they're terrified, right? They're like, whoa, this is really intense. So Moses responds with actually a bit of pastoral reassurance, right? And he says, "Don't be afraid, for God has come to test you, so that you will fear him and will not sin." And the people remained standing at a distance as Moses approached the total darkness where God was. And then continuing on into verse 22, then the Lord told Moses. So we have this back and forth. God's presence comes down after the people have prepared to meet him. They meet. The people are terrified. The people are like, whoa, actually, you go before us and you deal with God. Well, that's a poor way of phrasing it. You speak with God and then relay it back to us. And so Moses gives them reassurance, but then he moves forward and actually is meeting with God, and God continues to speak to him. And then really from this point in Exodus 20, verse 22, kind of through the end of the book, is God speaking to Moses and giving him all this information. And a lot of that is, hey, you need to build a tabernacle, you need to build a tent, you need to build some infrastructure to house my presence, because I'm coming down to meet and live with you and to dwell with you, and you need to have some things in place that I instruct you to build, and you need to keep these instructions exactly how I instruct you to do it. You need to do everything that I tell you, because it's for the purpose of my permanent dwelling with you. So that's what we have for the rest of Exodus. So I want to skip forward now to the last few verses of Exodus. Let me make sure I've got my spot in my notes. Yep. So Moses finishes all this work. Exodus 40:33. Moses finishes all this work that God has given him, building the tabernacle, the priestly garments, all these things, the tent of meeting, all of this stuff that he's instructed to build. So Moses finished the work. We see at the end of Exodus 43. So all of that is done. Now we see here this heading, the Lord's glory. And we see in Exodus 40:34 through 38, which are the last, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm terrible at math. The last 5 verses of Exodus is God's presence coming down and filling the space that he told Moses to construct for his dwelling. So picking up in Exodus 40:34, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses was unable to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud rested on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. The Israelites set out whenever the cloud was taken up from the tabernacle, throughout all the stages of their journey. If the cloud was not taken up, they did not set out until the day it was taken up. For the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and there was a fire inside the cloud by night, visible to the entire house of Israel throughout all the stages of their journey. So this entire point from God bringing his people out, even backing up further, you have Adam and Eve sinning in the garden back in Genesis 3. They're cast out of the garden. They're cast out of the place that God came to walk in the cool of the day. And then God's redemptive plan has been being implemented in stages. He cleanses the world through the flood. Then he chooses Abram to make a covenant with and says, I'm going to be faithful to you and your offspring. He's faithful to He's faithful to Abram's initial children, Isaac, Jacob, right? Jacob is Isaac's son. And then he's faithful to Jacob's descendants. And now, hundreds of years later, he's brought Jacob's descendants out of the land of Egypt, just as he said he would. And he's preparing to give them the promised land, just as he said he would. But before he does that, he meets them. He reveals his presence and glory to them. And then he gives them instructions for living in his presence, which they agreed to do. They agreed to uphold and be faithful to the covenant obligations. And then the rest of Exodus is how they prepare for that. And then we pick up in Leviticus, which is more specific preparation for that. Now we have kind of the law at large, and the law is about how God's chosen people are to faithfully uphold his covenant with them. And if they do this, that will result in them being God's kingdom of priests and God's holy nation. So remember that tie-in back in Exodus 19:6, where God is telling, or verses 3-6, where God tells Moses, hey, this is going to be the result if the people of Israel are faithful to the covenant. Now we see how they're supposed to be faithful in housing God's presence through the end of Exodus, and then how they're supposed to be faithful with one another, living out these covenant obligations as God's kingdom of priests and his holy nation. And if they do that, then this harmony between God and humanity is as it's supposed to be in that point of redemptive history. So that's what Leviticus is about. It's continuing to describe how these people who have agreed to be in covenant with God, how they're supposed to fulfill being his kingdom of priests and his holy nation. Then we get to the end of the book, right? We get to the end of Leviticus, and we see this section in chapter 26 of covenant blessings and curses, and we're like, whoa, holy smokes, right? Kind of ironic, pun slightly intended. Holy smokes, this seems really severe, but we have to remember this continuation of the narrative. Leviticus is part of the narrative. It's an extension of what we've read in Exodus, particularly Exodus 19 through 40. And then we have a further detailing of these covenant obligations that the nation has agreed to throughout the book of Leviticus. And then we get to chapter 26, where God says, okay, great. If you are faithful to these covenant obligations, then this will happen. If you're unfaithful, then this will happen. And all of the details regarding, all the curses regarding what will happen if they're unfaithful is significantly more than if they are faithful. It's quite extensive. But we have to keep in mind, it's a continuation of the narrative. The nation has agreed to be in covenant with God. And so that's what makes Leviticus so fascinating, because it's God telling the nation how they uphold covenant faithfulness. And so I think that's really fascinating. It's not how they get into the covenant. They're into the covenant by being chosen. It's how they maintain faithfulness within the covenant. And so hopefully that gives you a little bit better understanding of what the book of Leviticus is about. The first time you read it, it can be very easy to just feel lost and like, I don't even know how, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how this relates to anything. I certainly don't know how it relates to me. But we have to keep in mind that as the narrative progresses, we kind of move through a lot of sections of the Old Testament narrative at 50,000 feet, and then all of a sudden it zooms way in to like 10,000 feet. Leviticus, really Exodus 19 through Leviticus, we've zoomed in to 10,000 feet. We're not flying at a high altitude anymore. We've zoomed in, we've slowed down, we're kind of staying in one place for a while, and that's what's going on. So hopefully that helps. If you've never read the Bible, or if you've been really intimidated, you want to get more out of your faith with God, your relationship with God, and you want to get more out of the Bible, but you don't really know what that looks like or how that works, that's precisely what we're trying to do at Get More Ministries. We want to demystify the Bible, because a lot of people want more. They don't know how to get more. They don't even know where to begin or what that looks like, but they're desperate for it. And so they're like, what do I do? And so it's a big passion of ours to help people navigate that. And one of the best ways we can navigate that is simply becoming familiar with the biblical narrative. And that's why reading is so important, is you sit down and you read the Bible. Just read it. And if you don't understand something, okay, make a note that you didn't understand it, but keep reading. Don't let that derail you from reading it. Keep reading it. You will be amazed at how much you glean simply from reading. So if you've never read the Bible, if you've never read Leviticus, if you've never read the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, I'd encourage you to start reading it. It's really remarkable stuff, and you'd be amazed at how profoundly God communicates who he is and who humanity is, and how God and humanity are supposed to relate to one another. So if that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. We're going to be doing more videos, not only in this series, but in different series that have slightly different foci on the material we're presenting. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video. Happy Bibling.